Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're returning to it. This is the fourth in this series of videos, and for the first time today we're actually going to write a script. So what happened then to the third video? I hear you wondering, I can't find the third video. No, you can't. There is a third video, I made it and I submitted it to YouTube, but you're not allowed to watch it. The truth is that objection was taken by the YouTube team to it. I think because it had names and contact details in. Now all the names and contact details were completely fake, but I suppose it's possible that they might have been, I might accidentally have used somebody's real name or real contact details. Anyway, whatever the reason, I've scratched my head about this for a bit and I thought, well, the only way to deal with this is to take all names and contact details out. So, it's no longer a shed club, it's going to be a dog club. It's going to have exactly the same structure, but it's for dogs. And we're only going to use dog names, not people names. So nobody's sensitivities can be offended by this new spreadsheet. In all other respects, the new spreadsheet will operate just like the old one. It will replicate its structure and it will function the same as the old one. And we'll be able to use the same type of script on it as we could on the old shed club. Having to rewrite the video is one of the reasons it's taken a bit longer for me to produce than I had anticipated. But it's not the only reason. The other thing is that I had a surprise. I got a big surprise in making the video, and you can see that near the end of this video. I'd written a script, it looked perfect, it should have worked perfectly, but it didn't work. And it took me ages to work out why not. There wasn't really anything actually fundamentally wrong with the script, but it wouldn't actually work. Anyway, it was a tricky problem, but I'm pretty sure I've solved it. We've certainly got a solution that operates. Anyway, have a look at the end of the video, wait and see if you like. I'll just introduce you then to our new Dog Club spreadsheet. As you can see, it's the Southampton Superior Dog Club. There's no dog club of that name, it's a fake dog club. And it's very similar in structure to the old shed club one. We have dog's name rather than person's name here, and though we have a status as before, owners can pay for the year, in which case, on the dog's date of birth, they get sent a card with pictures of their dog in flattering positions in the card, okay? If they're associate, they just pay for each competition that they attend over here on a competition-by-competition basis, month-by-month basis, and they don't get a card. So we need this information and this information to go into our birthdays sheet. We also have an enrolled column, that is the date the dog was enrolled. That is not relevant to what we're doing today. We don't need to take the information for this column across. We're keeping it for the future because it does help to explain historic attendance, since a dog won't have attended any competition before the dog was enrolled. We then have the date of birth column. The date of birth column clearly is important for the birthdays list, and we will be taking that information across to birthdays linked. We have various details about the dog, breed and colour, then an owner ID. No, not an owner's name, no, absolutely not. Just an ID, a four-figure number ID. Now, actually, it makes some sense to do it this way anyway, because the relationship between the owner and the dog is one to many. That is to say, an owner can have several dogs. So 1576 has got two dogs here. 3147 has. 4050 has. I think I saw another one up here, 4326, and so on. So an owner can have more than one dog and any number of dogs. If you put all the owner's details into this sheet, you'd have to repeat them. You'd have the same details here as here. And that would be extremely wasteful. And not only that, it would make updating much more difficult. So it makes much more sense for there to be a separate sheet somewhere else, which will have owner's ID in, and then against the owner ID, all the details about the owner. So the name, contact details, email, phone, and all that kind of thing. Anything else that's relevant to the dog club. We're not going to be concerned with that sheet today. We need to know that it exists. And later on, we will actually spend a bit of time examining relational databases and what you can do with them with Google Apps Script. Then along here, we just have attendances for the shows that the dogs have attended. These are monthly. These are actually areas around Southampton, but there are no such shows. These are fake shows. But I want to have an attendance sheet because, again, in future videos, we will be dealing with an attendance sheet. So that is a summary of the master sheet for the Southampton Superior Dog Club. And as you can see, it's very, very similar in principle to the master sheet that we had for the old Shed Club. And here is the birthdays linked sheet for the same in the same spreadsheet, the same dog club spreadsheet. Okay. Now we had, as you remember before, for the Shed one, made up first of all a birthdays sheet, which we didn't like in the end for various reasons, and then we had a second attempt called birthdays linked. And that's exactly the same here. We're going to keep that. So we're looking at the birthdays linked sheet today. This is the only one we're going to change in using a script anyway. Everything else is going to remain the same. So what we have here, we have 3 columns which are taken over from the master sheet. The dog's name, the status of the owner, and the dog's date of birth, which, as I say, basically a copy of 3 columns from the master sheet. Then we have today's date. We don't need today's date. It's not really relevant, but it's of interest, and so I put it in. It's useful for the purposes of making the video. And then we have the next birthday. Well, as you can see, that's derived from the date of birth, but it's this year for those that are still to come, and it's next year for those whose birthdays have already been. We have the days for the next birthday. Well, today is the 7th of August, and that's also the next birthday of Brave, so there are no days to his birthday, and it sorts on this. So we have upcoming birthdays next, so we can get ready to send cards to the paid members who have upcoming birthdays in the near future. Now, I should say that I'm no expert on dog clubs, so this might be an absurd way to run a dog club for all I know. If it is, then I apologise to any dog club owners who may be listening. But I would say this dog club will serve perfectly well for illustrating the points that we want to make in this app script video. So please humour me with my Fantasyland dog club for the moment. One other thing to mention about this birthdays linked sheet in the dog club spreadsheet. Brave's name here is not actually entered as Brave as such in the spreadsheet, but instead it's linked to his position in the master sheet. So we have master equals master exclamation mark A19, which is the way you link to cell A19 in the master sheet. And the same is true of all of the first 3 columns. They're all columns that are taken from the master sheet, and they are all in the form of links to the master sheet. Now, the point about this is that if, for example, any of these change, so let's suppose that Brave's owner's status changed to paid, and that change was made in the master sheet, which is obviously what it should be made, then it would automatically change in the birthday sheet. So to that extent, this birthday sheet automatically updates. In a lot of other respects, though, as we are about to see, it does not automatically update. And the whole point about the script is to remedy that. Here we are back at the same sheet the following day. This is the birthdays linked sheet in Dog Club for YouTube. And you can see that the days to the next birthday have automatically adjusted, as indeed has today's date. But what hasn't happened is there has been no resorting. Brave's birthday has now passed, after all. It's another 364 days, and so Brave should be right down at the bottom of the sheet, not at the top. So one of the problems with this particular sheet is it does not automatically resort itself as time passes. Let's add a new dog to the master sheet. Now that should also, we hope, add a new dog to the birthday sheet. And we'll just check whether it does or not. At the moment, as you can see, we have 23 rows in the birthday sheet, and therefore we should end up with 24 rows. Let's see what happens when we add a new a new dog to the master sheet. So let's go in here, and maybe above Apollo. Apollo's now on A8, and let's just make sure that Apollo's linked to A8. Where is Apollo here? There's Apollo, and as you can see, linked to A8 in the master sheet. So Apollo's linked to A8. Let's add just above Apollo a new row for a new dog. So rows, 1 row above. We'll have a new dog called Tiddles. Can be a paid up member for the owner. Enrolled today, 08/08/2022, and relatively recently born dog, so we'll go for 12/07/2022. So there's a new dog. We don't need to fill in the rest of it because the only columns that are relevant to the birthday sheet are these first, those columns. No other columns are relevant. Let's see if Tiddles has now appeared somewhere in the birthdays linked sheet. So let's go back to the birthdays linked sheet. There should now be 24 rows in the birthdays link sheet, not 25 because we don't have a top row in the other sheet. So 24. Oh, but are there 24 rows? No, there aren't. There are only 23. Can you see Tiddles in there? No, I can't. Apollo has now gone to A9, whereas previously she was A8. So it has updated the links, but it hasn't put the new member. It hasn't put the new dog in. The reason for this is there is no link to this row. It didn't exist before, and so there can be no link to it. Let's now see what happens if you delete a dog from the master sheet. Will the dog also be deleted from the birthday sheet? Will we reduce the number of columns from 23 to 22? Sorry, number of rows from 23 to 22. So let's go into the master sheet. Here we are. And we will delete Daisy. So we go to edit, delete, and we will delete row 12, which is Daisy's row. So there it goes. Daisy is no longer on the master sheet. Perhaps she has retired from competitions or whatever reason. What's happened to the birthday sheet? So let's go to the birthday sheet, and this was Daisy's row before. Now what you can see has happened is that all the data to Daisy has been removed, but the problem is that Daisy herself, the row hasn't been removed, but the problem is it doesn't refer to anything anymore. So this no longer has anything to refer to in the master sheet because the master sheet is gone, and the same is true of this and this. This is a formula, but of course it's meaningless because there is nothing in C3, so it doesn't have any effect. And similarly here, E3 doesn't do anything, so E3 minus today doesn't do anything either. So essentially what we've got here is a messed up birthday sheet. So adding doesn't work, deleting messes it up, and passage of time doesn't properly update. That's why we need a script, and that's what we're going to do now. What we want then is a script that we can run whenever we make major changes to the master sheet, such as adding a new member or deleting an old member. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to delete entirely the contents of the current birthday sheet and then recreate it. So we completely replace the birthday sheet with a new birthday sheet. Now you may say, well, why not just overwrite it? Isn't that simpler? Well, overwriting would probably work if all you did was, if you didn't decrease the number of members. So if you added a new member, overwriting would be fine. But if you remove a member, it won't be fine because we'll have fewer members in the new sheet, and we'd have a last row which would be irrelevant in the new sheet. So it's much better just to delete everything and rewrite everything. Now in this video, we're going to use the same technique that we used in the previous videos. That is to say, we'll take everything in small stages, which should be relatively easy to follow. We'll use many simple procedures, none of which do very much, but which can be fairly easily explained. But at the end, we'll combine the procedures. We'll have a do-it-all program at the end that simply runs everything. The way we do this is we start off by going to Extensions, opening that up, and then to Apps Script. So we'll do that, and the script editor should come up. Here it is, script editor comes up. Okay, it creates a function, and it's empty. Now I'm going to change the name of the first function because the first function is going to be the initial delete, where we delete everything in the birthday sheet, and I'm just going to call it delete, initial delete, like that. For reasons that I'm going to explain in a minute, I don't particularly want the curly bracket there. We'll move the curly bracket down to there. And we'll call the project something like updating the birthday sheet. So we'll rename, and now we have the editor with an app script empty effectively, or with an empty function, and we're going to fill this function with code. We're going to create a number of functions and then run them all. So let's go straight next to the initial delete code sheet and create the first function. Okay then, the first function we're going to run is going to have do one simple job, which is to take the birthday sheet, which is here, and delete everything in it, or at least delete all the content, because we're going to replace it all with new content later. However, we want to keep the formatting. So all this bold type along the top here and down here, we want to keep as bold. And rows that are frozen, such as this row, we want to keep frozen. Otherwise it will end up sorting, and we don't want it to be part of the sort. But we're going to delete all the content of this and simply replace it all later on. So we're going to set up a function. Now, I know this works because I've tried it, but I usually like to set these things up in a document file like this with a nice big font so I can see what I'm doing, and just paste it in later to the app script, because editing on app script itself is an absolute pain, to be honest. So we're going to call it initial delete. So there we are, function initial delete. Notice that you're not allowed to have spaces in the names of functions, and also that you have to have these brackets, even though these brackets don't contain anything at all. If we were passing parameters to the function, then they would contain something, but we're not passing parameters, and so our functions are all going to look like that with an empty brackets there, but you still have to have the brackets. Now here's the curly brackets. Some people like to put the curly bracket up there, but I've never seen the advantage of that. It seems to be much clearer to have it like that. You can see that's where the function starts, that's where the function ends, because they're exactly in line with each other. So that's what we're going to do. It doesn't matter where you put this. The app script ignores indents and ignores spacing. So the first thing we do in this function is we create a constant. This constant then can be used to substitute for that, so you haven't got to type that in each time. You just type in SS. It's not going to change, and what it's doing here, it is identifying the spreadsheet that we're going to use. In this case, it's the active spreadsheet, the only spreadsheet that's open, which is our Shed Club for YouTube spreadsheet. So that's what that does. What we then do is we identify the particular sheet that we're using. You see, there's more than one sheet. There's a master sheet, as you know, and last time, as you also remember, we created 2 birthdays sheets, but we're only interested in birthdays linked. All the work we're going to be doing in this function is going to be on birthdays linked. We're going to delete it all in this function and replace it with new. But we need to identify this particular sheet that we're using because it's the only one that we're using in this function. We'll call it, so it's SS is that, basically. And we then use, oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. We then use getSheetByName, and we put the name in, birthdays linked, and we have to use the quotes. Again, at the end of each line, you have a semicolon so that it identifies that to come to the end of the instruction. So we've now identified the spreadsheet, and we've now identified the particular sheet within the spreadsheet that we're working with. The next thing we do is we get the number of the last row in the sheet, which in this particular case, in this sheet, is row 23, as you can see, that of Sky. We need to get that number 23, and fortunately, Google Apps Script has a function for this, which is called getLastRow. GetLastRow gets the number of the last row which has anything in it, any data in it, so it excludes any empty rows. So in this particular case, we're talking about row 23, which is the last row which has any data in it. And we're going to call that BDLastRow. That's a variable. We've let it become that. This is not a constant because, as you can see, we're going to change it in a minute. We could use var. You can use either let or var for variables that are going to change. The advantage of let is that it doesn't have any effect. The variable has no effect outside this function, so it can't accidentally damage any other functions. And so there's something to be said for using let rather than var when you want to write a function and you want to make absolutely certain that this has no accidental effects on anything else. BD sheet is what we defined here, so that's our birthdays linked sheet, and we're just going to get the last row in the sheet. We're going to put it into that function, so that'll be 22. But because of the way the for loop here works, we have it running as long as r, which is the row, is less than BDLastRow. If we left BDLastRow as it is, it's 23 if you remember, the for loop will only go down one less than that to 22. So we have to add 1 to BDLastRow in order to ensure that it includes, the loop includes the 23rd row. So we add 1 to it just to do that. We then create a for loop. Now r is the row number, effectively. Doesn't have to be r, that's what we've called it. It runs from r1 to as long as r is less than this variable that we now call BDLastRow, which is 1 beyond the last row, and it increases r 1 at a time. That's what r++ does. The for loop that we're using, the row for loop, is the whole of this. Sorry, that's not correct. It's the whole of that. And again, you can see it because we have these curly brackets placed like that so they line up, okay? And what it's doing basically is it's going down every row. So it starts at row 1 and it goes down row by row until it gets down to the last row, which is 23. That's what it does. Now what it does within that is we create a second for loop, which is this one. Again, the indents make it clear that this is the inside for loop. For each row, it goes along each column. And it goes from column 1 and it continues as long as C is less than 7. Well, you can see that in the birthdays linked sheet we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. That's 6 columns here. That is never going to change. And so if we set the loop to go from 1 to 1 less than 7, then we will go along each column within each row. So what it's going to do is for each row it's going to read every cell in every column until it gets right down to the last row, so it will have read every single cell in the sheet. We could have used the getLastColumn function, but since the number of columns is fixed, there's no need to do that. And for each cell that it gets to in the second for loop, it's going to get the cell, the content of the cell. That's how you do that. getRange, row column, okay? And we've defined the rows and the columns here. And we're going to use the clearContent function. Now, clearContent just clears the content. It doesn't clear the formatting. So what's going to happen is, all of this is going to be deleted by the function. But when the next functions refill this sheet with new data, then all the formatting, the bold here and the bold here, and the frozen row and the frozen column, all of those will stay. So that's the function. All we need to do now is to see if it runs. Before we do run it though, there's just one other thing that I do want to say, which is this. When you have identifications of spreadsheets and sheets within spreadsheets, or you're calling functions such as this, it's very important within AppScript to get the typing exactly right. A lot of problems arise because people don't always realize this. And in particular, you need to have the semicolon at the end, you need to have the brackets as they are here, and you need to have the capitalization as it is here. These are capitals, there and there. That is not a capital, and so on. And so you do need to get that right. You need to pay attention to that. If you don't, then quite honestly, the script simply won't work. Anyway, bearing that in mind, and it is quite important, we will now run the script. Let's paste in the script that we have just written. This is the initial delete function. That's the content of it. We'll go over here, we'll paste it in. There we go, let's just line that up so we've got everything properly lined up as properly indented. Now, before we run it, we need to save it. So we save it here, save project. Okay, and now we will run the script and see what happens. So you can see it's the execution log, it's coming up. It should be running in a minute. So wait a moment though, we've got probably to approve it first. So let's just see about this. We have to review permissions. Now, the first time that you run scripts in a sheet, then you have got to review the permissions, because in principle they could be damaging. So we'll need to do that and give it permission to run in this sheet. Okay, here we go. Review permissions. This is what we come up. Choose an account. Well, I'll choose my own account, pntodd@gmail.com, which is what I use. This is what comes up. Now you can go back to safety, but then nothing happens. We don't want to do that. We want to go to advanced. So we click on advanced here, and it says continue only if you understand the risks and trust the developer. Well, I'm the developer, so I trust myself. Go to updating birthday sheet unsafe, it says, but I know it's safe because I have just written it. So we'll go to that and click on it, and then it allows me to, it says it's going to see, edit, create, and delete all, or in principle, of your Google Sheets and spreadsheets. These apps can do a lot, so you have to be a bit careful with them. But if you trust the birthday sheet, as indeed we do, then we will allow it to do all of these things. So here we go, we're allowing it to do these things. And it's now started, execution is finished. And as you can see, it has deleted everything in the sheet. So we now need to repopulate the sheet, and for that we're going to need other functions. Our next function then is going to be to fill the first column of this now empty Dog Club birthday sheet. Essentially make this a copy of the first column of the master sheet. So here's the master sheet. So we're going to put this information going down as far as row 24 into the birthday sheet. But there's one thing to notice here, which is this. We don't want to take this top row across because all it does is contain the title. So we're going to start our copying from the master sheet from row 2 and go down to 24, whereas in the birthday sheet, of course, we're going to copy it starting from row 1. The way in which the program works essentially is to go to each of these, go down the column, each row in turn, copy the information from the master sheet and paste it into the relevant column of the birthday sheet until we get to the bottom of the master sheet column, which as you can see is row 24, and paste it into what will be row 23 of the birthday sheet column. So we should then have a full column here, which will be an exact copy of the master sheet column A. I'm going to call it function fill first col, exactly as before. You have no spaces here, you have these brackets and you have these curly brackets. We're going to declare the constants as before, the active spreadsheet. We're going to have the birthday sheet exactly as before, but this time we do need a constant for the master sheet as well, because we're going to be using both worksheets, both worksheet master and worksheet birthdays linked. Remember, we're getting information from master, taking it and putting it into birthdays linked. And this time we'll get the last row from the master sheet, because there isn't any last row for the birthday sheet at the moment, because it hasn't got any data in at all. As you can see, there's no data in the birthday sheet and hence no last row, whereas the master sheet does contain data and the last row is 24. So we're going to use the last row of the master sheet this time, not the last row of the birthday sheet. So we've declared our constants, that's pretty well as before. We're declaring last row, which is ms last row, and it's exactly the same as before, except there we had BD sheet last row, now we've got ms last row. And as before, we're going to add 1 to it, because we want to go down as long as r is less than ms last row, which means that ms last row has to point to the first empty column, so that it will go down as far as the last full column, that is to say Monty. We don't want the top row of the master sheet because it just has this heading in it and nothing that we want to copy across. The for loop needs to run from the second row in the master sheet to the last row with data in, which is 24. So now the question is, what do we put inside the for loop? Well, we're going to declare a value current. That's just a temporary variable that we're going to use for the time being. We're going to make that variable the value of what is in the master sheet in the row, not the present row for r, but the one below it, because we want to start this at 1, but we want to begin at r plus 1 is 2 in the master sheet. So we'll get that value, put it into the temporary variable current. We'll then go to the birthday sheet and we will set the value of current, but this time we'll set it into the row which is r itself. So the row, in other words, in the birthday sheet will always be 1 less than the row in the master sheet. We'll go through all the rows like that, and that should fill up the entirety of the first column in the birthday sheet as I say, a copy of the master sheet column, except that the first row won't be taken across. Okay then, as you know, we have an empty sheet for the birthdays linked sheet for the dog club, and now we will run the function that we have just created to fill up the first column. Let's go then to the script page. So we'll make a couple of additional rows, so we've got plenty of room for it, and we will now paste in the first fill col function that we have just written. Here we go, and we'll put it in to updating the birthday sheet. There we are, it's all in as we see. Now we have to save it, otherwise it won't recognise it. And the other thing we have to do, we must remember to do this, is to change the one we're running. It sort of says select function to run, and at the moment it's just on initial delete, but of course we don't want to run that again. We want to run fill first col, so we'll do that. Then we'll run it. And as you can see, it started off, so we'll go and see what it's doing. And we can see it filling up. It fills up fairly slowly, but it does fill up the first column. All of the dogs who were in the master sheet are now in it. You can see that, including the newly added tiddles. So it is now updating properly, whereas of course the sheet before did not do that. When it comes to filling the second column, the code is almost exactly the same as the first. The only difference is that we're getting from the second column in the master sheet, and we're taking to and copying and pasting to the second column of the birthday sheet. Running it is also pretty well the same. We copy it as before, we paste it across to the app script editor. We save as exactly as before. We remember as before to select the program to run, and then we run it, and we'll go along to the birthday sheet, and there you see it's copying across as before, again rather slowly. No difference in principle between this and the first column. The third column again exactly the same, no difference really. The only difference is that we're going from the fourth column in the master sheet. Remember, we don't take the enrolled date across, and we go to the third column of the birthday sheet. Otherwise, exactly the same as before. Here then is the current state of the birthdays linked sheet. We're now going to write script to create the fourth column. This, as you may remember, is today's date. Now, strictly speaking, we don't need today's date, but I think it is information. It is useful information, and so we will include it. So here is the script for the fourth column. It's slightly different from the last ones because we're not copying anything across from the master sheet anymore, so we're only using the birthday sheet, this one. So we only need to have the birthday sheet and the constants, and we can use the last row of the birthday sheet this time because it already contains data, so there is a last row, and we can therefore use the last row of the birthday sheet. So we'll call it BD sheet last row, or BD last row, and again, for exactly the same reasons as before, we will add 1 to it because we want to go down to the bottom, and the for loop continues as long as our row number is less than BD last row. Now, what we're going to do now, if you remember, the header is just today in text like this, but the rest of the column is filled up using a formula. It's equal today's date, so thus. And therefore we need to keep the same difference between the first row and subsequent rows as in the original sheet. We must therefore treat the first row different from the other rows. So we're going to get the range for the first row, 1, 4, and set the value. Now, one of the things about set value is anything that's in the cell, or you want in the cell, you can just put in there and put it into quotation marks. So whatever the cell had in before, you simply put it into quotation marks, and the script will set exactly the same in the cell. Now, the rest of it, you may remember, was based on a formula, and the formula was equals today. The square with the brackets like that, because that is how you do today's date. And what we're going to do then is precisely the same as this. We're going to set row, or whatever the row is. We're going to put equals today, etc., the formula, and the script only does that, but Sheets itself will fill out the formula for you. Now, one useful thing to know about this is any formula that you've got in the Sheets, you can simply use in the script by putting it in quotes. So anything that you can do in Sheets, however complicated, you can do in scripts because you can just do it this way if you want to. There may be other ways of doing this, but this is quite a useful way and it's quite straightforward. So we'll just do that, and again, we will see how it runs. Actually, before we run it, there are just 2 other things I think I want to tell you very briefly. We know that let is better than var when setting a variable because you don't want it to go outside the function. But we'd accidentally in these earlier ones used var in the second and also in the first. I hadn't realised at that point. It doesn't really make any difference because it's not actually going to do any damage, but it's better programming practice to use let. So in the third column we've switched back to let, and here we've switched back to let. The other thing to note is this. I made a note to myself. Today is going to be bold type, the heading, and it's already bold because the cell before had been bold, and I could say the formatting hasn't been altered, only the content has been deleted, not the formatting. But the point is I'm making a note to myself. This is how you make a note to yourself. You start off with these 2 slashes like that, and then the program ignores everything else on the same line. Okay, well, with all that now clear, we will now run it as I said we'd do before. Running it is in principle exactly the same as for the first 3 columns that we did. We just copy that, take it across, paste it in here, save it, choose the program, and run it. The only thing that is interesting is this. There we go. And it's instantaneous, you see. The first 3 columns took ages to run. This one fills up with today's date, which is now the 10th, by the way, straight away. Now, the 5th column, like the 4th, is made up not from by copying across from the master sheet, which as we have seen is very slow, but from a formula again, which is in principle very fast. There is, however, a difference between this formula and the formula in column D. Now, if you remember the previous formula, it was going to be the same for all of the cells below the top one, which was today. This doesn't change. It's always going to be equals today with those brackets. But with this column of next birthday, it's quite a complicated formula that refers back to C2. So the top one is going to be this with C2 there. But the next one is going to be C3. We're filling down, if you remember. The next one C4 and so on. So we haven't got the same formula in each of the rows. Now the way we can do this is we need to put the R into the formula. So the formula will be part string, okay, like that, then R, then returning again to string, then R, returning again to string, then R, etc., all the way through. And so when we come to fill the 5th column, we end up like this. We're going to call the content cell content. It's going to be, this is exactly the same as before, okay, there's no difference here. But the cell content now becomes, this is what we're going to put in here. We're going to put cell content in. So I'm going to declare a variable cell content, which has is let, so it won't work outside this function. And as you can see, we're going to take a string up to that point, then we're going to add R. Then we're going to return to the string, then we're going to add R again. Then we're going to return to the string, add R again, and so on and so forth until we get to the end of the line. So this is essentially how you do it when you want to put the R, whatever R is, into the formula, so that the formula can vary between rows. And this is the way we do it. As I say, I've decided to have a cell content variable and then set value cell content. I could just put the whole formula in there, but this seems to me to be a tidier way to do it. Otherwise, this is exactly the same. This is quite an important point, though. It makes your formulas much more flexible. And that being so, let's have a look at it. We'll select it all, as you can see, Control C, and we'll paste it over to the bottom of the updating birthday sheet script. So we'll do Control V, which will paste it in. We will save it as we do in the normal way, and we will make sure that we're running the correct programs. As with the 4th column, it should fill up very quickly. And indeed it does. It's not going back to the master sheet and having to get values each time. It's simply using a formula which it fills in almost instantaneously. Now we just need to fill the last column, and again it's exactly the same really as the previous one, at least in principle. It's slightly simpler if anything than the previous one. But as before in the last one, the formula changes depending on which row you are. So E2 in row 2 is the next birthday. So next birthday minus today is days to next birthday. In the next row down it's E3, and in the next row down it should be E4, and so on and so forth. So again, you're putting the row into the formula, but this time it's a somewhat simpler one than last time, and that's what you put into cell content. You can see it's exactly the same method as before, but rather simpler. And again, I set it this time for column 6 rather than column 5. And we're going to put the cell content in. There's no other difference at all in principle between this one and the last one. We'll select the 6th column here. We'll select it, Control C for copying it. Go to the scripts sheet, and we've got a bit of space at the bottom here below the 5th column. We'll paste that in. We'll save it, of course, as we usually do. We'll make sure that we are actually running the correct one. It seems to be already there, and we'll run it, and we'll just see what happens. Like the last column, this should fill fairly quickly. So let's see. We'll run it, and then we'll go straight back to the spreadsheet. And here it is. It's already put in the date of next birthday, as you can see, almost instantaneously. We have next to sort. We can sort on either of these last 2 columns. It doesn't make any difference, but we would actually sort on column 6. And then we will write a script which will run the whole of it just as one function rather than run each of these functions separately. All we have to do now then is sort on that last column so that we've got the upcoming birthdays as a soon at the top, and they run down in order. So all we need to do is sort this spreadsheet on the last column. We declare the spreadsheet as before as into a constant, and also the particular sheet that we're working with. Then we just use the sort function on this function that takes the sheet and sorts on the column that you want to sort on. In this case, 6. Now, we could actually sort on 5. It wouldn't make any difference whether it's sorting on next birthdays or whether it's sorting on days to next birthday. But we'll sort on 6. And true means ascending. If you wanted it to be in descending order, you'd put false. If it's false, then you get the highest numbers at the top. But we want the lowest numbers at the top. We want the next birthdays that are coming up soon at the top. So we're going to put it onto true. And that's all there is to it. And so we will now try it and see if it runs. We take the sortBDs function, we copy it across to the script itself file that goes in there just below. We'll just give it a little bit, taking it a bit further up. We save as usual. We make sure that we're running the right program. There we go, and we run it, and let's see what's happening. Again, I'm expecting this to run fairly quickly, so let's just click on run and go straight back to the sheet. And there we are, you can see it's already sorted. So that is everything that we plan to do, but we've done it in separate functions. We really want a single function that will do the lot. We'll address that in a minute. But before we do a single function, there are just a few matters of programming that I want to correct. I made a few mistakes going through. They're not very serious mistakes. They haven't prevented anything running, as you've been able to see. But they are mistakes nonetheless, and I want to correct them before we make our final function of functions, our single function that pulls everything together. 2 things I want to correct. They're both in the early columns. One of them I've already mentioned. I had accidentally put in var, whereas it's much better programming practice to use let. So let's alter those. Now the other thing is this, that I have now realised, I was thinking of this at the time, but I got it wrong. I've increased getLastRow by 1, but then I realised I've actually done that again here. So I've increased it by 1 twice. Now that actually is wrong. We don't need to increase it by 1 there and there. Because we've increased it by 1 in the loop, we don't need to increase it by 1 outside the loop. Let's get rid of that line. And we'll do the same in the other getLastRows as well. I have tried this. It really does run properly, but we will check when we run it that it is actually getting all the rows. But I had simply done the same thing twice, so now we have only done it once. So we wanted to get rid of, wait a moment, that's the one we wanted to get rid of. That one I really wanted to keep, so I think everything is now just fine. It's not very convenient having to run all these functions separately. Of course we can do that, but it's not ideal. It's much better to have one function which does the whole lot, which fills up the sheet column by column, and then sorts on the last column. And fortunately, in AppScript, that is quite straightforward. You can just have a function of functions. So we'll have a function which we'll call doItAll, like that, and we have the curly brackets as before. And all we do is put function calls in it. So we're going to call initial delete, then fill first, fill second, fill third, etc. And once we've got all the columns, we're going to sort on them. And that should do the whole lot. So then we just need to use one function. We don't need to worry about the other functions. It makes it much easier for the user. Again, we will see how it works. So there it is, the function doItAll, which calls all of the others. We'll go across to our updating birthday sheet script and we'll put it in, paste it in. We'll save it, and as usual, we will select it to run it. Okay then, we're going to run doItAll. Before we do that, let's just make sure we are going to get all the rows across, having made that change to the program. If you look at the master sheet here, the last row is 24, but the top row is the club name, and so we should only expect there to be 23 rows in the finished birthdays linked sheet. So that's something we're going to check in a moment. Let's first of all then run this and just watch and see what happens. It's deleted. It's now filling up the first column. It's very slow, this. It keeps going back to the master sheet in order to get the value, then putting it here, then going back to the master sheet to get the next value, put it here, and so on and so forth. So it's constantly going backwards and forwards to the master sheet. It's not quick, is it? I think there is room for improvement here, but it has got the 23 columns. By contrast, the last 3 rows are almost instantaneous, where it's just picking up formulae. Let's just check the number of column rows again. 23 rows, yes. Now, what is very odd here, though, is that it doesn't seem to have sorted, does it? I don't think there was anything wrong with the sort. Let's just check that the sort function is in do-it-all. Yes, it is. Sort BDs is there. So what exactly is the problem here? Is there anything wrong with the sort algorithm itself? Is there anything wrong with sort BDs? Let's go to the procedure and just run sort BDs and see what happens. Let's make sure then that we are running sort BDs. There we are. We'll run it, go back to the birthday sheet and see if it's running on its own. And it's run now. It has definitely sorted. So sort BDs is working. It certainly works when you call it on its own. It doesn't seem to work when you call it in a function of functions. This is very strange. I'm going to need to get my thinking cap on and work out what exactly is going on. Anyway, this really baffled me. I had no idea what was going on here. It took me ages to sort it out. So I went to the internet and I went to the books and I could find no solution. So I had to theorize and come up with some ideas. Anyway, I started with the idea, well, maybe it's sorting on different columns. Maybe when you say sort 6, it doesn't necessarily sort on column 6, but it may depend upon the position of the cursor perhaps, or the active cell, or the declared range, or something like that. But if you look at the spreadsheet, it's pretty obvious it's not sorting on any column at all, is it? There's no column here which is apparently being sorted on. And I even put some data into an empty column here to see if it was sorting on that, but it's not sorting on anything at all. But on the other hand, if you run the procedure on its own, the sort BD's procedure, it always sorts on column 6. So that was a red herring. That wasn't worth pursuing in the end. I then wondered if it was about timing. You see, the way the function do-it-all works is that sort BDs is called immediately after fill 6th column ends. There's no gap here, no delay or anything. But maybe it takes sheets a while to fill the 6th column. So although it's got all the information to do it, maybe it hasn't done it yet. And maybe sort BDs isn't actually sorting on anything because there's nothing in the column yet to sort on. But when you call it later on its own, the sheets had time to fill up the column and it's working perfectly. Anyway, it seemed to me this was a hypothesis that was worth testing. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to slow it down so that sort BDs doesn't work until it's got something to sort on. And the idea I came up with was this. We'll create another column, column 7. And this will definitely contain the values because we'll actually put the values into column 7 and we'll make sure it does it and we'll make sure that they're there. We'll then sort on column 7, see if that works. Now column 7 has only been created as a device to sort, so we can then delete it and let's see what happens. This is what we're going to do anyway. What we need to do then is to change the sort BDs function. We don't need to change any of the other functions, we'll just change sort BDs. We don't need to change do it all either because sort BDs is already in there. We're going to do a little bit more in sort BDs than we did before. So as before, we create the two constants for the spreadsheet and birthdays linked sheet. Now we're going to run a for loop. This for loop is exactly the same as before. It goes through all the rows in the sheet basically, and it runs from r equals 1 as long as r is less than BD last row, and that is going to be the last row plus 1 because that's how we've defined it. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable which we're going to call temp. Okay, and that's going to get every cell in column 6 sequentially in the for loop, and it's going to get it. It's going to get its value. So we're going to get that value, put it into temp, which is as I say, a temporary variable. Then we're going to get range 7, which is a new column. We haven't done anything in 7 yet. And for each of these rows, we're going to set exactly the same value as we got from 6. So what it's actually doing is copying column 6 to column 7. But it's copying it one cell at a time. So it's making sure there's a variable which has something in it. It's going to take that from column 6, put it into column 7. So column 7 should now be an exact copy of 6, but it will have the values in anyway. And then we're going to sort on 7. Again, it's ascending order, so it's true. And once we've sorted, we don't need column 7 anymore. So we'll just delete it. That should be sorting column, not sorting row, shouldn't it? Delete the sorting column. and we'll delete column 7. This is how you delete column 7. We don't want column 7 anymore, so we'll delete it using the delete column function in scripts. And having done that, we should have, we hope, 6 columns as we should have, and properly sorted. So the plan is then, once we've got to this stage, which is at the end of fill column 6, we haven't yet sorted, we will run our new sort procedure, which will copy each of these values in column 6, one by one, into another column 7. It's then going to sort on 7. This should now have some values in it, and then because we don't need 7 anymore, we're going to delete it. We copy our new sort BDs function across. We go back to the birthdays sheet, and we go to the short sort BDs. We replace this with a new one, so we just get rid of that. Control V, and we need to save it, of course. And now we need to make sure that we're running do it all, which indeed we were before anyway, and we'll run it. I think we'll go straight to the end part where the sorting occurs. This is rather boring, isn't it? So column 6 is filled, and it's now filling up column 7 one by one. It's actually putting some values in here to sort on. You can see it's done that immediately, and it has deleted column 7. Well, we have done what we set out to achieve. We have created a single function which runs everything. It repopulates the birthday sheet with all the dogs who are in the master sheet, so it deals with additions and deletions. It brings it up to date. We have the relevant date here, the 11th now, and the birthdays. We have actually done it. We've done exactly what we set out to do. Now, we have done it, but it's not perfect. So the next question is there any way that we can improve upon our work so far? Well, we've got a solution that works, and so we have done what we set out to do. This has been a very long video, so that's as far as I'm going to take it for now. But, on the other hand, there's a lot more to do. This is by no means perfect, is it? And just as a few things I think we need to sort out, then let's just go through them. At the moment, we've created a fake 7th column. This 7th column doesn't do anything apart from provide a column to sort on. Do we really need to have a column that we're just sorting on and then deleting? Is there a better way? Well, there is a better way, actually, and we'll have a look at that in the next video. Second problem is that the first 3 columns fill really slowly. And you have to remember this spreadsheet is only about 20 rows in length. If you've got a spreadsheet of 1,000, for example, it's going to be a really significant delay there, isn't there? So we've got to find some way of making it run faster. Now, looking at the first 3 columns, here we have Apollo's name. Now you can see that Apollo's name is actually entered as Apollo. It doesn't link to the master sheet. And this is also true of all the cells in these first 3 columns. So Apollo's status, for example, is entered as paid. It's not linked to the master sheet. It follows that if we make a change, for example, we change Apollo's status from paid to associate, and as price is proper, we do that in the master sheet, that change will not be reflected automatically in the birthday sheet. So the data in the first 3 columns won't automatically update just because the master sheet updates. Now there are some other issues as well. For example, do we want this script to run automatically? Would that be an idea? Whenever the sheet is open, can we run it automatically? Now, personally, I'm not really in favour of that. I prefer to retain some control, but some people might prefer to run it automatically, and we should have a look at that. And finally, can we have a proper menu for running it? So at the moment, you see, we're going into our script, we're going into the functions, we're deciding which function to run. I mean, this is all pretty well programmed, this stuff, isn't it? Users shouldn't be required to do that. Users should have some kind of menu. So there's quite a lot more work to do yet, but not today, not in this video. This video is long enough. We'll save that until the next video. If you liked this video or found it useful and would like to see more videos of the same type, then please subscribe to the channel so that you can be informed of any future videos as they become available. Thank you very much for watching.